Regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We have both Ms. Gruhl and Mr. Smith are on approved absences. Unfortunately, Mr. Weezer is off ill today, so Mr. Rosenthal and myself will go through the agenda. And what we'd like to do on the agenda is items 11, 12, and 13, if we can go on consent.
So moved.
Okay. On number 11, on consent, if we could ask the clerk to identify, in the sense of, just for the report, is that whether this program has been implemented and rolled out in early 2008 as scheduled, and also if we can identify what funds might be coming forth to the city based on the state law as it relates to the PEG and also the gross revenue dealing with franchise fees. So we can get some idea of what revenue is forthcoming and also if this program is currently in operation.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I could ask them also, do we know where public access and government access, community access will be? Will they be on channel 35 and 36? Do we have an answer for that, or can we get an answer back on that? Is there anybody here from AT&T? Boy, I guess they figure they got it knocked, huh? Nobody from AT&T? Anybody from ITA? Well, I hope before the council acts that we get a report on where the PEG access channels are.
We're going to add that to the committee report and ask that they come to council on that. On number 12, although we consent on receive and file, I'd ask that we ask the city clerk's office to strongly consider this budget position for 09 and 10. We're going to add that to the committee report. So we've moved 11, 12, and 13. We can now start on the items number 8 before we go to closed session.
Okay. Item number 8 is a motion relative to various fund transfers to expedite design and construction of parking lots in Council District 11.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Anybody here? DOT? Hi, how are you?
Martin Bland, Department of Transportation. This is a project called Abbott Kinney for CD11. We plan to build two parking facilities. There'll be lots, and they'll be on the Electric Avenue. Any questions?
Yeah. How many spots will we end up with? How many parking spots?
I don't have the numbers exactly with me. The designs are not complete, actually, either. We're making some accommodations for the Slayton properties with some entry to their back area, the egress and ingress. So there have been some modifications to the designs, and they have not been finalized yet, so I don't have the exact numbers for you.
I'd like exact numbers as soon as you can conceivably get it. And when will we take this project and do it and complete it and cut a ribbon?
It should be very shortly. I don't have an exact date. Again, there's still some outstanding legal issues. There were some squatters on property that we had to deal with too, and we're resolving those issues, and it should be within the next month or two that we get going.
I'm told that we will be putting them in place in August.
I think that is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What I'd like is, with the chair's support, obviously transfer the funds, okay? And I want to report in the Transportation Committee, the next Transportation Committee, on those questions. I want the funds transferred now. And then in the next meeting, I want to know how many spots we're going to have, where we are with those who have been encroaching on city land, okay? the sensing of it beginning at one street to the other. I'd like to see a map, a chart, a beautiful piece of paper that shows me Abbott Kinney, shows me the lots behind it, how they're going to be located, and so on, in entrance and exits. And then the last question is, what kind of anticipated revenue, and how will that revenue be shared with my Venice, Abbott Kinney area, and also with the city? Those are the questions I'd like in a report that we could have at DOT.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but this money we need transferred now to get the project going.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you on the timing, on the questions Mr. Rosenthal asked, would you have the ability to get those done by the time they do this committee report, or would it be a separate report?
What timeline are you talking about?
Before this goes to council from the Budget and Finance Committee?
I have to check with BOE, and I'm not exactly sure about the timing.
Okay. Yeah, we'll transfer the money. Well, let me ask you, one other thing is, and this is just for the CA or the CLA, is there a timing issue on?
Yes, you'll have a little more time than usual on this. We had suggested that this item be scheduled after July 1st at council. There's one line item in the budget. The funds would not be made available until July 1st. It's part of the 2008-09 adopted budget. So that would provide a little more time than usual before it gets to council.
Okay. So with that the timeline, what, it's because the funds aren't available?
Yeah, it's contemplated in the 2008-09 budget. It's specifically on the first page, it's projects to be designated. 2.2 million, those funds will be in that account after July 1st, but they're not there at this fiscal year.
Okay. So that gives us, what, 2 weeks or so?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rosenthal, would it satisfy you if we have to hold this to go to council July 1st, that we ask DOT to provide information over the next 2 weeks for this committee report, and you'll have the whole package when it comes to council?
It would be absolutely great, but please understand this is just a administrative transfer. I don't want
Yeah.
the timetables to be held up in any way. The community's expecting this in place in August.
So these are all your funds?
Yes.
Yeah. So the issue is that the last item, I believe, account number E201 will not become available until after July 1st, so we can plan this to get to council as soon after July 1st as possible, and we ask DOT to come forward as part of this report with as much information that Mr. Rosenthal has asked for, so we can have it as a package when it comes to council.
Yes.
Okay? So we'll move that items with those directions.
The next item, number 9, is a Joint Controller Board of Public Works CAO report relative to approving an auditor and funding for the annual audit contract for fiscal years 2007-8 through 2009-10.
Let me just ask a couple of questions. I didn't quite understand in reading the report that it appeared the Controller's Office was, as part of this RFP, going to produce about 1,000 hours of resources, but after the RFP was identified and selected, those 1,000 hours of resources were withdrawn, and I need to find out why that was, and now it impacts the contract by a couple $100,000.
What happened, I'm Louis Benjamin from the Controller's Office, and what happened was, in the RFP, we had indicated that the Controller would provide 2 staff people with the equivalent of 1,000 hours to work under the supervision of the external auditors. And then later on, the Controller decided that these people were not going to be available because of some rules and regulations by the Board of Accountancy, California Board of Accountancy. The Controller would not receive the benefit that they thought they would have received by devoting those people to the audit. So we ended up, and that 1,000 hours was not included in the proposed fee. So we end up having to add that in.
Yeah, but let me see, the concern I have is that we have an RFP in which 2 people compete, and in our report, we say we selected one company because of the significant difference in the cost. And then, after we select them, we then remove resources that were part of the original RFP, and then add another couple $100,000 to the winning bid, which brings it very, very close to the second bid as it relates to the cost.
Well, not really, because neither Neither proposal included the 1,000 hours.
I know, but we didn't go back to the other company. We just selected a company, we then removed the 1,000 hours, and then we negotiated with them to say, we'll add 200,000 back to the deal because of us taking this out. We never went back to company one and said, now that we're removing the 1,000 hours, do you have a different proposal?
And what we did was, see, the decision was made on the original proposed fees. Both of them had excluded the 1,000 hours.
I know, but again, you're missing my point. My point is, I understand that clearly, that we made the proposal, we made the selection. We did not go back to both bidders and say to them, we're now moving 1,000 hours out of the RFP. Do you have another bid? We negotiated only with the one we selected.
No, we didn't.
Okay, who did we negotiate then?
Bill Lamb from the Controller's Office. We evaluated the proposals based upon the proposals that we received. After we received the proposals, after we completed the evaluation, only then did we make this change. The city attorney has indicated that in the past, that after we complete the evaluation, then we can negotiate price with the selected vendor. We only did that after we completed the evaluations.
I know, but the issues that I'm concerned about is that all that is true, and that's why I have a concern, that we put the RFP out, we selected a company, we based our decision on their cost. We then, after that decision was made, we renegotiated more work, that we made the decision to remove city employees, and we created more work and added money to their proposal. We did not go back to the other bidder and say, we've now changed the rules of the RFP, and now do you have a different proposal, knowing that we've removed the 1,000 hours? If their price went up accordingly, then that would be fine. Then we could make that decision. Without ever talking to them, we don't know what their response would be.
We don't know what the response would be, but at the time, we evaluated both proposals on a consistent basis. The reason that this change occurred is that the Controller's Office over the years has had problems retaining auditors. The goal was to provide an ability so that the controller auditors working with a CPA firm could get their CPA license as part of the licensing program in the state. However, the State Board of Accountancy had changed their rules so that it was considered to be a conflict, so that we could no longer do that. You're correct in that we evaluated the proposals on a consistent basis, and then afterwards we did make that adjustment. But I think from our standpoint, we did evaluate the proposals consistently.
Well, I don't disagree. I just think after we evaluated it, in my judgment, if we're going to alter the RFP to any measurable degree, we should have gone back to both bidders and said, is your price consistent? And not negotiate with one and say, now that we've removed the 1,000 hours, we're going to just add $200-some thousand to your contract. That's what my concern is. Let me ask you also on dealing with, did we have any idea why, with a fairly sizable contract, why we only had two bidders? Is any assessment there?
I think in the large case, the two bidders that we received are firms that have done business with the city. They're small to medium-sized firms. Both of them have done the city's annual audit, and the city has a pretty substantial audit. The Big Four, now that they're no longer the Big Eight, the Big Four, for the most part, are getting out of doing governmental work because governmental work is not that remunerative for them. On the other hand, small firms have a difficult time stepping up to this level because a lot of governments believe that they can't have a small firm or a medium-sized firm. They believe that their bond rating is tied to one of the Big Four. So over the years, we have been willing to try new firms. Macias Genie was our auditor before Simpson & Simpson, and Macias Genie has now stepped up from us, and they're doing the LA County audit. Simpson & Simpson is doing has just been awarded the school district audit. But it's a big step up for many firms. And
Let me ask, when did we find out that the controller was no longer going to provide these resources? When did that become public, or when did we make that assessment?
Trying to remember. Maybe about 2 months maybe. When I found out, I think they had responded already.
So they made the
had
decision,
responded
at what
already.
point in the process? After the decision was made? Before the RFP came back? When was that decision made?
it was after the proposals were received.
It was after.
But after the proposal was received, before the decision was made of assessment? Or where in the process did the decision come that the controller no longer?
I would have to look back. I cannot recall at what point it was.
You could find out at what point that became relevant? Was it after we made the assessment? Was it before? Was it during the process?
It was not considered as part of the process.
Okay, I mean, but it may not have been considered, but was the decision that these bodies were not available, was it coincide with the review? Did someone know that and it wasn't part of the review? That's what I mean.
It was late in the process. Whether or not it was before we completed the evaluation or after, I'd have to go back, but it was after the proposals were received.
Okay, if you could get that timeline for the committee report so we'd know at what point that decision was made. Was it when the process, after receiving the RFPs, but before a decision was made, or after this? We need to know that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then also, what is the revenue source for the current $2-point-something million for the audits?
The initial source is the general service purposes, city purposes budget, where it is budgeted on an annual basis, and then the sewer construction and maintenance fund reimburses for the SCNM. Environmental affairs reimburses for the air quality, the AB 2766 funds, and the LA Housing will reimburse for the additional audits related to Fannie, getting money from Fannie Mae in a conjunction with affordable housing.
And so if we could make sure that those line items of where those funds are coming from are part of the report. And my final question is, why are we going to the reserve fund for $240,000 now? Do we have any department funds or reimbursements that can cover that?
I can at least address the first part of that question. Recommendation number 3 of the report has a instruction to appropriate the funds from the UB reserve for economic uncertainties. That was not contemplated in our year-end FSR. It was not set aside or reserved. Therefore, it would have to come from the reserve fund. The net fiscal impact is the same. Had we set it aside in the UB economic reserve, we would have increased our transfer from the reserve fund to balance the budget. So there is no fiscal impact that as a result of changing it from the reserve fund. And it's,
I'm just wondering if, being that so much of it is coming from department reimbursements, why would this part not be a part of department reimbursements? Being that they're audits of,
The departments reimburse the general fund after their particular audit is completed, so they don't reimburse on a advance basis.
but I'm saying, why is this 240 being dealt with differently than the large part of the 2-point-something million?
The 240 is part of the 2.6 million.
Right.
So it's all part and parcel of the same
But
thing.
most of the 2-point-something million is coming from reimbursements of departments.
yeah, it
Why are
results.
we looking at this different and say that it has to come from the reserve fund?
Actually, the largest part of the audit is the city's financial statements themselves. The rest of it comes from the special purpose funds on a reimbursement basis. So this would be reimbursed proportionately also after the audit work is completed. The auditor has not started work yet.
Okay. But we're saying that the large part of the 2.1 comes from the general purpose fund, but it was budgeted.
If I can add a little bit to that, the part that we're asking to take from the reserve fund is the cost increase, the $241,000, not the cost of the entire contract, but essentially the cost, the portion of that wasn't known at the time that the budget was
So we're saying
prepared.
that the 240 is the portion that was not budgeted in the general purpose.
Yes.
And you can't attribute it to a reimbursement.
It will, some of that is attributable to a reimbursement, but I think for purposes of encumbering funds for the contract, that amount will need to be provided for this fiscal year.
But now, do we have to have that at this time, or can we determine how much of the reimbursement would reduce that impact on the reserve fund? Because I'm trying not to hit the reserve fund, that's what I'm trying to do.
And
I-
coming from the controller, I appreciate the concern.
What portion of the 241 is reimbursable from other departments? Some of it is probably general fund, which is not reimbursable, and some of it is.
Yeah, I would just say that on a percentage basis, because what will happen is the general fund will be reimbursed, so we would take money from the reserve fund at this point. I'm thinking of whether or not it would be preferable to put something in the committee report requesting departments to reimburse this year on an advanced basis to minimize the appropriation from the reserve fund?
Let me ask the controller and this CLA-CAO to get together and figure out how do we minimize the 240, and if we can cause it not to occur, it would be helpful. And then the next question, if we have to hit the reserve fund at all, it should be after July 1st.
All right.
You can get together and figure that out, how much of it should be reimbursed, and can we get the advancements? And if there's any hit at all, it should be after July 1st. Can we do that?
My concern is that we need to execute a contract with the auditors before June 30th so that the auditors can do the cash count on the city treasurer, which is the $6 billion that the treasurer has.
But do we have to have all of the funds before June 30th, even do we do a contract?
Normally, we do. I guess we could put something in the contract that full funding is subject to appropriation by the council.
'Cause the thing is, whatever we can do to push it after July 1st, and whatever we can do to find out how much of it is reimbursement from departments and get it advanced, because we'd like not to go into next fiscal year nibbling away at the reserve fund before we even get there.
Yes, sir.
So if we can get together for the committee report.
Okay?
Yeah, one question. I appreciate Mr. Park's thoroughness and his detailed follow-through. Explain to me, is it policy and procedure, you pick through an RFP, a group, and then you turn when you renegotiate and change the substance of the RFP?
Generally, we don't. However, in this case, the reason that we were doing this became something that we could no longer do. We could no longer get the benefit of having controller auditors assigned to the outside auditor because they can no longer sign off on the experience side that our auditors get. So we no longer have the recruiting capability of being able to give our auditors a CPA for working with the outside auditor. So at that point, we had said 1,000 hours, and we could no longer provide that 1,000 hours.
And you didn't see any need to go out again and let the other one come in and react to that? Or do you figure it was over that stage? How do you deal with that?
We figured it was past the stage that we evaluated both auditors on an equal basis.
Regardless of changing that data?
Yes, sir.
Even if they had complied with it, you feel that they still wouldn't have won that competitive bidding?
No, because it would have brought the price closer, but the Simpson & Simpson was still rated higher.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
That's my point. Because we never asked the question, we don't know.
But it would not have changed the technical evaluation, and the change in price would not have altered the outcome.
But I think we relied heavily, at least the report I have, that we picked this company because their price was significantly lower.
Well, it was significantly lower, but it was also the top-rated technical proposal. And so by changing the 225 to 75,000 per year, changing over the life of the contract, would not have altered the selection.
Okay, we'll move this item with those recommended requests to be added to the report, and particularly dealing with a timeline of knowing when the city became aware of the controller's change in the RFP regarding resources and the information regarding the CAO, CLA, and controller, determining how much of the $240 million can be paid in advance and whether it can be delayed payment until after July 1st.
So moved. Mr. Chair, could we revisit number 11 for one quick second? I'd like Roy to say something before we go into closed session.
Thank you, Councilman Rosendahl. Mr. Chair, we spoke
Your
with...
name for the record.
I'm sorry, Roy Morales, CLA's office. I spoke with the executive officer from the ITA, and by coincidence, there's a joint meeting of the Board of IT Commissioners and the Municipal Public Access Board, the oversight bodies for Channel 35 and 36 going on right now, where they are discussing a new model for the delivery of PEG. So in this particular case, this is a significant policy question that you asked. We have a new entrant into the market that should be answered prior to moving forward on this. There is no time constraint on item 11. I'd recommend that you continue it. Not only ask that question of ITA, ask the, as well as the revenues that we should anticipate, but you may even be able to visit the policy question as well as to how are we going to deliver PEG in the future.
So your suggestion is leave it in committee
Leave it
until
in
we
committee.
get those answers resolved?
Correct. I believe there's no time constraint on this. This is just, the report itself is being received and filed.
Let me ask you, Roy, should we send it back to ITGS?
I don't believe so.
The policy issue?
They've already considered this specific item. So in this particular case, if they did not discuss that, that question can be asked here.
Okay. So we'll continue this. What do you think on timing?
Oh, I will recommend that this be on the next agenda, and I'll contact the ITA and ask them to be present, and request that a member or a representative from AT&T also be present.
Yeah, I appreciate that because anecdotally I had heard that they weren't necessarily going to be putting Channel 35 and Channel 36 on their channel designation. And I'll say very clearly, it's unacceptable to put it on demand and play out another strategy. That's the law in Sacramento, and I will not in any way waver from that. Many of our subscribers aren't too cleverly able to play around with that remote and figure out on-demand business. 35 and 36 are sacred locations on the dial. I should know. I put them in place when I was in the cable business. And I don't want AT&T to get out of that commitment.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. So we'll continue number 11. Last item,
Number 10 is the controller report relative to the status of reserve fund loans as of March 31st, 2008.
Bill Lamb from the controller.
yeah, let me just ask, one question I have is that how aggressively are we moving forward on these loans? Because it looks like from the last report till now that we're barely $500,000 in play that we've recovered. I'm just wondering how aggressively and what do we expect by within the next quarter? Because most of this stuff, did we make any headway for the ones that were June 30th and the other ones that dealt with revenues forthcoming? Because within a 3-month period, we barely moved the ball on from, what is it, 24.2 million in December, and the first quarter we're at 23.8, so
We
barely making progress.
We follow up with departments on a quarterly basis. The CAO follows up with departments on a regular basis. We're not above using the name of both the mayor and the city council. in pushing the departments. So
Let me ask you, when is, this is a quarterly report?
this is a quarterly report.
So we're into June and talking about March. So we should make great progress by June 30th, is that what we think?
Sally Rocio from the Controller's Office. For the unfunded expenditure as of May, we collected around 4 million. The balance is 3 million already on the unfunded expenditure. And most of the council approved is almost 10 million is long-term.
Okay. Yeah, I see the long term, but what I'm concerned about are those that should be repaid by June 2008.
Yeah.
Whether we're making any headway on that almost 5 million. And then also, many of those loans in that category of 4.3 million were loans in which verbally people said would be to us before the end of the fiscal year. So that's somewhere around $9+ million of the 23.
We've collected around 4 million already up to May.
Okay.
Of the
I would just
23,
ask
yeah.
that for that next quarter report, that in addition to this report, because it's important to us to get as much money back by June 30th, but those other two categories, upon receipt of revenue from other departments or receipt of revenue from other government, that's roughly almost $10 million. If we can have not only the report that's forthcoming in a quarter, and so that would be, what, October, that would report to June?
Yeah, basically, because that period of time, we're closing the books and determining where we are. And then we also have the state controller's report and the state street report, where Sally can be fined personally if we don't do that on.
When is our next report?
It is the June 30th report. We will try to accelerate that. Normally, it's October, because that's when we can get to it.
All right, so it's the June 30th report that would take us from March to June.
Right.
Is there a way that we can accelerate getting that information to the committee before October?
We will try to do that. The priority is the preliminary financial statement, which will give us a better understanding of the reserve fund and the reserve fund balances.
We closed the books actually in August, so we send our confirmation letter from the department to the departments after we close the books, and we give them time to respond to us before we prepare our report. But we'll try our best to accelerate it.
Okay.
Before-
Let me ask if we'll move this report and note and file it, but have an instruction to ask the Controller's Office to see if they can facilitate the next quarter reporting. And if we could also ask that there be significant emphasis placed on those loans that are be repaid before June 30th, the loans upon receipt of revenue from other city departments, and the loan upon repaid on receipt of other governmental entities. We put specific emphasis on those three so that we can recover as much of that 23 million as possible into the reserve fund. Okay?
Okay, we'll inform the department when we follow it up.
All right. Thank you very much. So with those instructions, we'll note and file.
Thank you.
So that's it.
Yes, closed session items
Why
next.
don't we do closed session in here, and then that way we don't have to get up and move.
Sounds good.
I don't know what. All right. Okay. We're back in open session, and item number one, I'd like to give a specific instruction asking the CAO, CLA, the city attorney, and personnel department to work together to evaluate the current workers' comp laws to determine whether there are issues that the city should seek legislation that addresses some of the issues of continuous trauma and other areas in which were discussed as relates to claims in this case. Thank you. So that does it. Great, thank you.
Look who called me just now.